Hello, friends. It's me, Police Chief Host Eric of the Debate Police. And I'm here to see what's going on with this gun control debate these people are having. And I try to do a good job of being sort of technical in my critiques. So, without further ado, let me introduce the new Debate Police theme song. Hopefully you like it. Debate police. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. Police. Welcome back to Debate Police. Let's see who we got lined up here today. I'm going to flow this. I may go faster than they go. We'll see how that plays out. But I'm going to flow it over here so you can keep track of it even if you think they're going too fast. Even if you think it's going too fast.
And public policy. This is the first of two debates that the Senator will. The topic of today's Michael Shermer
into the house and is going to kill the all right, testing.
All right, here's the beginning of it, I guess. This guy's going slow, I can tell, so I put him on double speed. Remember, I will be flowing it.
Okay, good. Thanks for that generous introduction. All right, so I'm going to talk about gun control laws and the right to bear arms. Michael Shermer and I have not seen each other's presentations, so I don't know exactly what he's going to say. So I'm going to just give sort of a generic discussion of problems with gun control and the right to own a gun. Okay. So I'm going to talk about two main things. There are two main kinds of problems that apply to most gun control laws that people are talking about. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is gun rights. That is, the problem that restrictions on gun ownership might be violating the rights of individual gun owners, in particular their right to defend themselves, and it makes the state something like an accomplice to crime. And the second main problem is the non-compliance problem. This is a problem that gun control laws are frequently ineffective because the people that they're aimed at restricting will not follow them. So the laws will simply fail to have their intended effect. Okay, and now, of course, the picture there in the corner is to show you how cute gun ownership can be. All right, what about this gun rights issue? Right, so I'm going to start with hypothetical examples. So these are hypothetical examples I discussed in a published article back in 2003. So imagine there are three people in this example. There's a person who we will call the victim, and another person called the killer, and another person called the accomplice. The victim is sitting in his house at night when the killer breaks into the house and is going to kill the victim. The accomplice is somebody who's in the house for whatever reason, and for whatever reason the accomplice holds the victim down while the killer comes and then stabs the victim to death. All right, question, what is the correct moral assessment of this action by the accomplice? So obviously the killer committed one of the most serious crimes, or maybe the most serious crime that we have, but what about the accomplice? And I want you to have the intuitive reaction that, well, the accomplice performed an action that was comparable to that of the killer. The accomplice performed a serious wrong, which is about as wrong as actually killing the victim. It might be slightly less bad, but it's comparable. All right, here's a second example. Like the previous example, except this time, the victim has a gun, which the victim would use to defend himself against the killer, except that the accomplice grabs it and runs away just before the victim is able to do that. So, and the result is that the victim is then killed by the killer. Question, what is the moral status of the accomplice's action in this case? And you're supposed to have the intuitive reaction that that is like the previous case, right? It's another case in which the accomplice prevented the victim from defending himself, and that is morally comparable to actually being the killer. It's maybe slightly less bad than actually being the killer, but it's kind of on a par. Right, here's a third example. There's a citizen who wants to own a gun for self-defense purposes, and if able to, would use a gun to defend himself against crimes, but the government either stops the citizen from getting the gun in the first place or takes the gun away from the citizen. With the result that the citizen is unable to defend himself on some actual occasion when a criminal comes and then is victimized by the crime. What would we think of the state's action in this case? And the intuitive reaction that you're supposed to have is, well, that's similar to the previous two examples, actually. The state prevented the person from defending themselves and thereby became something like an accomplice to the criminal. The state's action there is maybe slightly less bad than actually killing citizens, but it's not a lot less bad, right? And so the argument here is going to be that the state, by enacting gun control laws, makes itself an accomplice to crime. That is, it does something that's morally comparable to actually committing multiple robberies, rapes, assaults, and murders. So this is my argument. A nice graphic in the corner there is from King of the Hill, the hilarious cartoon. Okay, so my argument, first premise, gun control laws coercively prevent some individuals from defending themselves against crimes. There are some people who, if able, would use a gun to defend themselves against crimes, and gun control laws will typically result in some people not doing so who would have done so. And coercively preventing someone from defending themselves against a crime is seriously wrong. Specifically, it's morally on a par with actually committing the crime. So the conclusion is that gun control laws typically are seriously wrong, specifically that they're morally comparable to the state committing multiple murders, robberies, rapes, and assaults. All right, now, does that mean that they could never be justified? Well, so the claim there is that the government is violating people's rights if it prevents them from defending themselves with a gun. And these are further hypothetical examples that are supposed to illustrate points about the nature of rights and the way rights work. So this is to illustrate a point about violating people's rights in order to help somebody else. So this is a well-known hypothetical example in the ethics literature. Say that there's a town in which a crime has been committed that caused a lot of public outrage. The judge, it's a sheriff. The sheriff of the town can't find the actual criminal. But he believes that unless somebody is punished for this crime, there are going to be riots in which multiple innocent people are going to be injured unjustly, of course. So the sheriff comes up with a plan. He can frame an innocent person and get that person to be punished for the crime, and that will prevent the riots. And just accept that that's true. Just accept for the purpose of the example that that would prevent the riots. What should the sheriff do? Should he frame the innocent person? Most people have the intuitive reaction, which I think you should have, that no, he should not do that. That would be unjust. Why? Because it's a violation of the rights of the innocent individual. And what this illustrates is that it's not morally permissible to violate an individual's rights, even if doing so prevents a greater harm to other individuals, right? It could be preventing a harm to several other individuals that would be comparable to the harm that you would commit, but it would still be wrong, because that's the way rights work, because your moral responsibility is to not violate other people's rights. Right? Your moral responsibility is not to fix every problem in the world. It's first of all to make sure that you yourself do not violate other people's rights. Okay, now that doesn't mean that it's never permissible to violate an individual's rights. So there are hypothetical examples people like to talk about in which somehow killing an innocent person prevents World War III, in which case you should kill the innocent person. There are some possible conditions, right? But what these examples illustrate is that at the very least it has to be that violating the individual's rights prevents a much greater harm. It can't just be preventing a slightly greater harm or just a few times, right? It can't just be that you're saving a few people. It would have to be very large harm. Okay. So conclusions here. It's wrong to violate an individual's rights even to prevent a greater but comparable benefit, even to produce a greater comparable benefit for others. It might be justified to do it to produce a benefit that's many times greater. So gun control laws are wrong even if they would prevent greater but comparable harm to others. They might be justified, but only if they prevented many times as much harms as they caused. Okay. So now we have to consider sort of the costs and benefits of private gun ownership. In the empirical literature on this, one of the main things people talk about is the frequency of defensive gun uses. So how often do people use a gun for self-defense in the United States? There's a wide range of estimates. So you can get estimates between 55,000 times per year and 4.7 million times per year, right? Number of times that a person used a gun to defend themselves against a crime. It's weird that the estimates are so widely varying, so we don't know, with much accuracy at all. The most cited estimate is by Gary Kleck of around 2.5 million per year. And the average estimate is somewhere around 3 million or something. The low estimates are by the National Crime Victimization Survey. This is a non-anonymous survey, which is conducted by the Justice Department. So there could be a bias, a downward bias, because you may not want to talk to the chief law enforcement agency of the government about something that you did that could even conceivably be considered to be illegal. When they have your contact information, they have your name and your address. You may not want to tell them. The high estimates of defensive gun ownership, defensive gun uses per year imply that they're significantly more common than actual gun crimes. Right? So it's quite possible that private gun ownership prevents more crime than it causes. Another thing that people commonly talk about is concealed weapons. So there are studies of this, the effect of allowing people to carry concealed weapons. There's a famous study by John Lott, which suggested that having more permissive laws for carrying concealed weapons reduced crime. Now, that was subsequently disputed by a bunch of people, so it's under debate whether it actually reduces crime. It might have no effect. It depends upon sort of assumptions that you make. There was a review of the evidence by the National Research Council, part of the National Academy of Sciences in 2005, which is, by the way, not a partisan report at all. The report is very even-handed and basically says, well, the results are kind of sensitive to what assumptions you make, and there's no clear consensus.
Okay, let's stop here. So, in the first instance here, when he's talking about these moral assessments of accomplices, he's not accounting for intentionality and foreseeability. It's foreseeable that some people will be prevented from defending themselves by a law that prevents gun ownership. But it's not the intentional outcome of it. And if, in fact, you could establish that it works, that gun control laws work, or that they're, on balance, produce more saved lives or something, then presumably, in that instance, you would say, well, this change to policy has a foreseeable but not intentional harm of preventing some instances of self-defense, but has an equally foreseeable and intentional benefit of preventing gun crime or gun deaths overall. That would be assuming you could establish that solvency, that your gun control law is going to work. And I don't think there's any reason why a gun control law couldn't work, but I think it would have to be it would have to be Second Amendment violating in the United States. We'd have to reject the Second Amendment in favor of some sort of impacts calculus. I don't think that's a good idea. I think his second argument here about it's not okay to violate someone's rights in order to help somebody else is unnecessarily analogous. Is it okay to violate somebody's rights? In other words, be precise about what's happening here. It's called concentrated good for diffuse harm. Concentrated harm for diffuse good. Sorry. Concentrated harm for diffuse good. So The harm here is concentrated on those who would lawfully use a gun. And the diffuse good is by preventing everybody from having a gun, including those who would lawfully or unlawfully use one, then presumably you would prevent gun violence by anybody except for the state. Now, whether or not the state has an appropriate amount of use of gun violence in defense of the law is another question. But presumably, if you could, in fact, enforce a strict gun control law, then you would probably justify it in that fashion. It's not possible in the United States without violating the Constitution. So, anyway, I think his arguments here, these stats seem outrageous to me. How often is a gun used in self-defense? 55,000 to 2.5 million instances. That might include brandishing a gun to scare away potential thieves or something like that. Really? That many? 55,000 I'd buy. 2.5 million? I don't know about that. It just seems unlikely. Let's see what the other side seems to say here argumentationally. Okay.
All right, testing. Okay, good. Thanks for that generous introduction. All right, so I'm going to talk about gun control laws and the right to bear arms.
Here's a famous sign in Wichita, Kansas in 1873. Leave your revolvers at police headquarters and get a check. The gunfight at the OK Corral was over gun control and the enforcement of the law. Here's a Dodge City, Kansas, 1879 sign. The carrying of firearms is strictly prohibited. Any persons or persons found carrying concealed weapons in the city of Dodge or violating the laws of the state shall be dealt with according to the law. The result of these Wild West gun control laws in a 10-year period, total murders were 15 or 1.5 homicides per year, a dramatic decline from the rate before. In other words, more gun control, less crime. Michael made reference to John Lott's famous book, More Guns, Less Crime. I'm saying more gun control, less crime. Number 3, more guns equals less crime. John Lott's book. The U.S. crime rates are comparable to other Western countries who have few guns. In other words, compare our non-gun-related crimes. Car theft, burglary, robbery, sexual assault, aggravated assault, and adolescent fighting rates are similar to those of other high-income countries. But our homicide rates are off the charts higher. Why? Guns. Here's guns per 100 people in different countries, and as you can see, we're almost one per person. Some people have no guns, like me, have no guns, but other people have lots of guns. That makes it close to one per person. Here's the gun murder rates in the developed world, and there we are on the far right. Again, these numbers are just off the charts higher. This particular chart here is important. First, look at the blue. This is average non-gun homicides per 100,000 people. The rate in America is comparable to other European and Western industrialized nations. It's the green, the average gun homicides, that serves as a kind of experimental control to see what variable it is that's causing the carnage. It's the guns. Here's gun deaths by gun ownership of another study, guns per 100 people and the number of homicides per 100,000 people. We're number one. America, we rule. Yeah, sure. Here's another study, homicide, suicide, and unintentional gun deaths among 5 to 14-year-olds. This is the United States versus 25 other high-income countries. So they're going to give us a mortality rate ratio. These are non-gun homicides. So us compared to the average of 25 other Western industrialized nations, 1.7 to 1. Gun homicides, 13.2 to 1. Non-gun suicides, 1.3 to 1. Gun suicides, 7.8 to 1. And unintentional gun deaths, 10.3 to 1. In other words, it's the guns. That's the problem. Here's gun ownership versus gun deaths by state. Again, you see a nice linear relationship there between the number of guns and the number of people that die by gun. Number 4, when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Gun control does not mean we're going to ban or outlaw all guns. Gun control does not mean you're anti-gun or you're an opponent of gun. Handguns are protected by the Second Amendment, the famous 2008 Supreme Court decision in Heller. There's been 2, actually, in the 2000s. That would make it virtually impossible for that to be reversed now, so we have to face that fact. But this is not a slippery slope argument. For example, the licensing and regulation of cars does not mean only outlaws will drive cars. Police and courts need gun regulation to bar high-risk people from guns. Or else, what's the point of having a civil society based in the rule of law? By the way, conservatives are always saying, we're for the rule of law. Yeah, okay. Why don't you apply it to all areas? 1934 National Firearms Act regulating manufacture and sale of machine guns. Did this result in only outlaws having machine guns? No. Where are today's machine gun Kellys? By the way, this was backed by the NRA. This is when the NRA was a gun safety organization rather than a political lobbyist organization. Number 5, criminals avoid armed citizens. Criminals routinely engage armed citizens. Drug dealers, armed gang members. Gun deterrence doesn't work. Street gang members are 8.8 times more likely to own handguns than other youths and 19 times more likely to be homicide victims. Drug dealers are 3.7 times more likely to own a handgun and 6 times more likely to be homicide victims. It's the guns. Myth number 6, America's culture of violence. That must be it. If you saw Michael Moore's film, Bowling for Columbine, he kind of went through all these arguments. This was one of them that he leaned heavily on, which I think is busted by the fact that other Western countries watch just as many violent videos, films, and TV shows, and yet they don't have the rates even remotely close to our gun homicide rates. I wonder why. Let's put our thinking caps on. Oh yeah, they don't have guns. Number 7, guns in the home stop crime. Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery on Injuries and Deaths Due to Firearms in the Home, 1998. Every time a gun in the home was used in a self-defense or legally justifiable shooting, there were 4 unintentional shootings, 7 criminal assaults or homicides, and 11 attempted or completed suicides. In other words, a gun is 22 times.
This guy's kicking his ass, right? There's no disputing the fact that this guy is kicking his ass. Because unfortunately, the first guy attempted to make arguments that were about impacts that were ill-advised. The gun control side is going to win impacts by comparing to other countries. However, the best argument to make here is that in the United States, because we don't have general gun ownership prevention like they do in other countries. In other words, guns are never going to be able to be made illegal, as this guy makes a point here. So the best argument against it is, what gun control laws are actually going to be effective? Given the fact that everybody's going to be able to purchase guns, would you like to limit the size or caliber of the guns people can get so that we're not dealing with such big bullets or so much capacity or something like that? Then make them argue that point. If you're going to argue whether or not getting rid of guns is a good idea, which this guy is doing, then you're going to win that if you're on the gun control point. Obviously, countries that don't allow people to have guns, that have strict gun control legislation on the books and enforce it accordingly, which is like almost every other Western democracy or Western-style democracy, obviously they're going to have much fewer gun deaths, and there's no disputing that. But what we're arguing here is not fundamentally a issue of whether or not having guns is a good idea. Is it a good idea to have guns as a society? The answer is, if you're looking at just the impacts, no, it's not. Concede that point. Concede that point right off the bat. And then say, now look, there might be some people who argue that it's worth the total number of deaths that we experience each year as a country, because the alternative is to do what? And that's the best argument. Is the alternative is to do what? Are you going to force everybody to give up their guns? How many times have you seen a sticker on the back of a truck that says, I'll give up my gun. I'll give my gun to Obama when he pries it from my cold, dead fingers. There's zero chance you're going to get everybody to give up their guns that they already own. So you're talking about hundreds of millions of guns already existing in the country. So make the arguments then related to that. Say, okay, well, first of all, I'm not opposing gun control, which makes sensible limitations to existing gun ownership rights. So obviously, the right to own a gun is not absolute. Nobody can own a nuclear weapon. Nobody can own a fighter plane. Nobody should be able to own a battleship. You don't want private battleships, patrolling the seas and deciding when they want to fire upon other ships and shit, right? I'm not saying that. Look, there are reasonable limits, even if it's not the case that gun ownership will actually lead to a huge increase in violence. You can't. The more firearms you have in a country, the more chances there are for firearms to be used in ways that are bad in the impacts, regardless of how they were intended to be used. So, I think it's an area where libertarians need to concede some ground and just say, look, we're going to have guns in the country for sure, because there's an individual right to own a firearm. Now, all we have to do is agree that there should be some sensible sounding, regardless of whether they're actually sensible or not, limitations on automatic, semi-automatic weapons or whatever, or things that allow you to fire off multiple rounds very quickly, and then just deal with that. If you're going to argue against any kind of additional gun control legislation, then you say the problem is we're arguing about gun control in the United States specifically, where we know we are limited by this constraint as to what we can do gun control wise. So the question is, what ought we do in addition to what we do right now? Make this person advocate specific things, because the first guy is talking about it as a moral issue, which, look, I agree that generally violating rights is not a moral issue, but we already understand that we can't treat firearms or destructive power as an absolute right. One doesn't have an absolute right. Think about it in terms of not the object, the gun itself, but the right to destructive power. One does not have the absolute right to possess sufficient destructive power to destroy a whole city, for example. And the reason for that is because nobody has ownership over that much stuff they can destroy, I guess you could say. Nobody has ownership or rights to access any amount of stuff of that quantity that they can legitimately destroy. You could define the right to ownership as the exclusive right to destroy. If I own a nuclear bomb, I'm claiming more destructive power than I can possibly use to destroy my own property. And that seems questionable to me. It seems obviously that we want to, if we're going to have laws restricting things, be practical and say, well, there's some sort of gun control laws that we're going to just have to deal with. Okay, so I afford the win to this guy. I mean, just watched a little bit of it. He's obviously more well prepared and is doing a better job. And this other guy is just, and the other guy's making bad moral arguments and not even acknowledging the fact that it's a foreseeable, intentional thing. And needs to really sell in his initial framework that we ought to prioritize the rights-based criterion, the justice-based criterion over some other criterion. He failed to do that. So I'm like the debate, the type police, I can't spend forever pulling these people over. So I'm just going to kind of go with my policeman's gut here. And as police captain, I've got an excellent gut. Anyway, I afford the round to this guy. He wins, and congratulations, pro-gun control people. You win that particular debate. That's it. Thanks for watching this exciting episode of Debate Police.
Debate Police. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained.